Who writes the Community Voice newspaper? Who edits the Community Voice newspaper? You pick it up, you read it, but you never really get into the inside of it. Well, this particular show, we got a special guest here, the editor of the Community Voice newspaper, Mr. Charles Weaver. Welcome to our Black Profile, and good to get you here.
Glad to be here.
Now, when we talk about our Black Profile, we've been profiling individuals for Black History Month. When we talk about media in the local area, Black media, there's no other name that could ever come to the top except for Charles Weaver, the editor of the Community Voice newspaper. Why is it, would you say, that the Community Voice newspaper has had such a significant impact on this community?
Simply because we, the staff of the Community Voice, we make an attempt to accentuate the positive. In the past, ethnicity has not been played up to a positive standpoint like it should be. And I think that I speak in terms of the African-American press all over the United States, that we are trying to create, instill pride within our readership. And so this is basically why our readership has steadily increased, annually.
Let's go back a bit. Let's go back into time, as they would say. Let's go back to the early days when you were sitting around pounding away at the typewriter, considering the whole possibility of putting out a paper that was going to talk about what was going on in the Black community. What was going through your mind in those early days? Did you ever think that, we looking back, it started in 1988. Here it is, almost 10 years later, the Community Voice newspaper is still alive, well, and kicking. Did you ever think that it would be around that long?
No, I really didn't. This particular need was born out of a craving to convey or to disseminate a diversified news, to, they say, Black populace. And also I understand that this has always, since its inception, has been required reading material for the non-Blacks, especially in the local governments. And so I really felt like I wanted to make an impact just to see how far that this would perhaps go. And then from that point, I started to call on various conglomerates to see if I could get them to help underwrite, my efforts through advertising.
Now, when we talk about this paper, one of the things that stands out mostly about this paper is the fact that you accentuate the positive things that are happening in the African-American community. Why is it that you take that approach?
I have to, because normally when a person reads the exploits or the various common day activities of African Americans, seemingly there is a bit of denigration going on, and whereas Blacks are made to be the negative aspect of what's going on. They are at the bottom of the barrel. Everything that can be stated negatively is stated. But there, I felt like that the Black folks per se had a lot of things that they were doing of great significance and importance, from the youth to our elder citizens. And I felt like this information should be conveyed to our readership. And this is why I undertook this particular project.
Right. Now, as a part of the Black History Profile that we're doing, the Black paper has always been a significant part of documenting what's going on in Black history, not only here locally, but also nationally. How do you see your paper as it relates to documenting the Black history that has taken place here in Lee County?
I follow the creed of the NNPA, which is the National Newspaper Publishers Association. I consider myself as being one of the 333 existing of Black press across the United States. And our job is to convey, to disseminate as much information as we can, especially under the leadership that say we try to create the smorgasbord of news, or some people call it a solid plate where you can have your sports, your editorials, your local news, church news, and what have you, which creates a composite of what's really going on in the black community.
Now, when did you realize, Mr. Weaver, that the Community Voice newspaper had developed the kind of readership or legs that it would survive almost, here we are, almost 10 years later? At what point, was there a significant time or a point that you remember that you said, hey, we got something going on here, we got something that's special here? Is there anything that triggered that memory to you?
I can recall vividly that my third issue in 1988, when I only published, I think, 2,000 papers at the time. And then I received a lot of phone calls, and people were knocking on my office door as well as at the front door to my home asking for copies. And from that point on, I had to say double of my the amount of papers that was being printed in order to accommodate this reading need. And at that point in time, I felt like I was filling a void, a deep void, or filling up a deep hole so far as the lack of say sectional news or news relevant to African American interests.
Now, how do you go about, with your paper being a black paper, and we're here in Black History Month, how do you go about when it comes down to having a special paper for Black History Month, in that your paper focuses on blacks all the time? How do you view all of that whole concept of February is Black History Month, and how do you go about approaching your paper for that month?
Every month is Black History Month to me. As a matter of fact, every week. I tend to try to show black history even from our youth to our senior citizens, because we have as many people here on the local level making worthwhile or noteworthy contributions to the American way of life, and some things that are being done positive. So I don't necessarily have to say beat the bushes or to look for international heroes or what have you, because we can find them right here in Lee County or Southwest Florida.
Now, you being a big fan of jazz, and you've gotten a chance to write about some jazz. Now, Coleman Hall, I think it's called, down there on Martin Luther King Boulevard, used to be a big juke joint, and you talked about that a lot. Why don't you share a little bit of information about the jazz set back then, and also your experience in jazz around the area?
Well, naturally, when I first came here,
Is it Cullen Hall? It's Cullen Hall, right?
McCullough Hall.
Right, okay.
I wasn't here during that particular regime or that particular era, but many of the classic jazz bands that they had, like Count Basie and Duke Ellington, they were stalwarts in the field of jazz. And of course, history has it that there was more white patrons there than blacks, and they had to accommodate the needs of blacks.
And now, those who may be listening, they may not know exactly where McCullough Hall is located. Why don't you share that?
McCullough Hall is located in the 2700 block on Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard. It is right next to Anderson Package Store. And I think on that same corner you find Style and Menwear.
That's right, right there in Dunbar. A lot of significant people in terms of jazz history traveled through that area. Now, you somewhere along the way, you got a chance to pick up the drums and become a drummer, a jazz drummer. How did that all come about?
Well, my family background is rooted in music. As a matter of fact, I was named after the great Charlie Hall Singleton. I was named after him, Charles Fowler. His name Charles Fowler Singleton. He was recently cited in Jacksonville, Florida, as being one of the great elder statesmen from that area. And he also was the composer of Stranger in the Night, which has been rendered vocally by such greats as Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, and so many other classic greats in jazz.
You know, we could sit here, we could go jazz all day. I can see how your face lights up when we talk about jazz. Let's slide back a little bit to the Community Voice newspaper and talk about now the Community Voice newspaper. One of the things that it does is it used to anyway, carry an editorial section that you would write and talk about your opinion about various things that have occurred in the area, and is very educational. Now you've gone away from doing that editorial. Why is that?
I just taken a brief respite, from the common everyday drudgery. And however, I have not abandoned that cause. What I'm trying to do is see if I'm trying to take the community voice to another level, to make opinions more diversified. And I'm trying to get people in the community and with no age differential to come in with topics. I don't want to dominate, my own people. But I would like for other people to interest, and I would like to invite people from all sectors to come to write, and they become guest editorials.
I see.
And I'd be glad to.
Now, you covered a lot of news in the last 10 years with the Community Voice newspaper. And in retrospect, when you look back, let's take 3 significant stories that have impacted African American history here locally. What stories come to mind?
The stories come to mind primarily is I would say the first story of the impact was concerning Deion Sanders, the first superstar other than Walt Wesley, from this era, and how he was treated by the African American community as well as the white community. And of course, each particular community has skewed, I guess, the characterization of the Deion Sanders. The second significant impact article of what was happening here was the election of blacks to the city council.
Dr. Knight,
yes.
And Veronica Shoemaker.
Right. And from that point, how we were able to really get other people to become colorblind for a few moments, and then we started seeing other blacks into various divisions of government, like say Jackie Hubbard and Judge Anderson and so on. And this is only the beginning, and I feel like that we're going to have more African Americans into the various sectors, and as the old Jim Crow feeling started appearing, then we will have more blacks, coming into fore.
How do you see Chief Honor Gibbs being elected to the Chief of Police for Cape Coral, and Chief Larry Hart being elected to appointed to Chief of Police of the City of Fort Myers, both being African Americans? How do you see that playing out in terms of the way we view our history here?
I see this as the beginning of what you call a significant drum roll. The drum roll has started, and it has started, and is going to continue to build into its dynamism. Whereas we have Chief Gibbs, and we have Chief Hart, and we have, the name escapes me now, Glover in Jacksonville, who is the sheriff. This is impacting all over. I can go to Savannah, Georgia, a new black mayor there. A good friend of mine, he's also a black newspaper publisher, Charles Cherry, the former NAACP head for the state of Florida, that's in Daytona. And let's go out to San Francisco.
Now, right now, let's stay here for a second. Let's talk about Chief Gibbs and Chief Hart as it relates to the race relations in this area. You've covered the news. You've been under the rock, on top of the rock, behind the rock. You get some. You have informers, people who tell you inside information. Do you see these two individuals being able to use their power to make a difference, or do you see them as just figureheads in the judicial system?
I would not like to say to trade places with them. They are making significant contributions every day, and they know that they are constantly under a microscope.
Okay.
And everything they do is going to be glorified and as well as magnified. And what they are doing is showing the world that they should be colorblind and they should look at a person's content rather than as a person's color. And I feel like they are making a great impact. You might not see it maybe in the next 3 months, but I'm looking at this for maybe over a period of the next 4 or 5 years where you will see a proliferation of blacks entering into not only into the criminal justice field, but they will be entering into other ancillary fields as a result of these people challenging these the status quo, with their innovative elections or appointments to these particular areas.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a look back at 1995. You got a chance to cover some significant stories in 1995, namely the Million Man March in Washington, where Minister Louis Farrakhan was the person who orchestrated it. He was recently selected by the black media as the black media's Man of the Year. He received that award. Some individuals here from Fort Myers traveled to Washington, D.C. and participated in the Million Man March. Haven't heard very much about the Million Man March and since then. Do you think that the Million Man March is going to make a significant impact on the way African Americans interact here in 1996 and going forward?
I think it's going to make a significant impact, not only in the African American community. The basic teaching or the basic concept of the Million Man March envelops and into all areas, be it white, be it black, be it Indian, and is atonement. Where he's saying we're coming back to the community. We're coming back to our basic concepts of the living, where a family is first. And so this concept here has really caught on and has mushroomed, and it has entered into all phases. Not only are these truths being preached or being exhorted from the pulpits of the African American churches, they are in all synagogues, temples, and so on in the white areas. It's the basic truths, and I'm glad to be in a position to identify with Sir Louis Farrakhan, and whether he was black or white, that he is really getting the whole American populace, to go back to the basics.
Let's go back to your early days, growing up here in Fort Myers. When you first arrived in Fort Myers. Okay. Let's go back and talk about how long you've been here in the area, and what surprises you most in terms of the Dunbar community, whether it be positive or negative in terms of its development since that time.
What surprised me most of the Dunbar community is this unique diversification, where we don't have what you call a caste system, where you can find layers of say and ethnocentric people, and also socio-economic centrics. We find them in a melting pot. Now this is a unique here because you can't find that nowhere else in Southwest Florida. I would even say throughout Florida, because you're going to find the rich, the poor. Each one have adhere to the concept of quarters. I'm sure you've heard of that. Mm-hmm. Quarters means that if you in this quadrant A, only the rich live here. Quadrant F, only the poor live here. In Fort Myers, everybody lives in basically the same area.
Economic status.
That's it.
Well, that's a good point that you raised, Mr. Weaver. Now let's talk about Martin Luther King Boulevard. Most of the time, when people identify Dunbar, they think about Martin Luther King Boulevard, and we know that there's a lot happening now in terms of the widening of Martin Luther King Boulevard, the proposed shopping center on that street, and a lot of other things that are supposed to improve it aesthetically, the way Dunbar projects itself to the community. How do you see Dunbar looking, let's say 5 years from now? Do you think people can be sure or feel comfortable that a lot of these changes are going to take place? And also, are these changes going to be for the better?
I think so. I want to convey the feeling, and I have done it in my writing, that Martin Luther King Boulevard represents our living room, the living room to our community. And 364 days past, it's still in the same basic, unaesthetic position as it was a year previous. And I cannot just blame African Americans. I have to blame the various components of the government and so on, where there's very little effort that's really being made to try to keep the living room to the black community clean and viable.
Let's talk about business development. You often hear about the stories about how ML King in his early days was a thriving business metropolis for African Americans, and the black dollar turned over in the black community. Do you see that would ever happen again, where blacks would start patronizing their own businesses, their own newspapers, their own schools, and making their own communities thriving economically?
I certainly hope so, because I really hate to hear people discuss how long a dollar bill lasts in the black community, which is supposed to be 15 minutes. And it should be, dollar bills should be able to evolve and revolve this community for at least 36 hours. Across the so-called proverbial railroad track, the dollar bill has been traced on like Cleveland Avenue and at the malls and so on like that. It lasts 27 hours.
Unbelievable.
But in the Dunbar area, it's at 15 minutes. And I just feel like that we should. They say charity begins at home, and if that is a basic truth, we should start patronizing our own businesses and what have you. From little acorns do big oaks grow.
That's right.
And
now let's go back to the media again. The Community Voice newspaper juxtaposed to the Fort Myers News Press. Now, the Fort Myers News Press, in your opinion, how do you think they have done, if you had to grade them, on showing diversity in their paper, A being the best grade, F being the worst grade, over the past 5 years?
I would say a C+, because they have the staff, they said manpower, to do a lot of things, and that's the reason for my being, because which is called niche marketing or niche reporting or niche publishing. That's what I do. I know one that's a come behind, and I crack and I seal up all of the cracks and so on, and which has been left by the daily press. I'm not saying anything negative about the paper, because they have their role, and they survive on sensationalism, and whereas the role of the black press is to disseminate and to convey, black information, and because things like I report would not, some of the items that I report would not be of interest or would not be of any sale value, to the daily paper.
That's right. Now, do you think that the black community has learned to appreciate the value or the power of advertising in black-oriented media?
I think so. And before I started my paper here, the concept of advertising was a bad word amongst black business people, because this was an item that they could not afford. When I came along here, I made advertising rates affordable. A lot of times I have to say they call it biting the dust, in order to make ends meet. But the point here, I feel like that I am doing a just service for blacks so that they can get into the niche of advertising, that people know what they're doing. As a result of that, there's been a proliferation of obviously black businesses.
Now, how would individuals get an opportunity to know your paper? In other words, and let's say if you're sitting out and you've never gotten a chance to see the Community Voice newspapers, where are some places they can go to get their hands on one?
Almost all of the merchants up and down Martin Luther King, we're merchants. We have distribution of places at most of the beauty parlors, the barber shops, and various grocery stores on Fowler and Fowler Avenue Street, as well as the Palm Beach Boulevard.
Well, why don't we do this? We're going to get a chance, and cameraman Billy, you get a chance to hold up a couple of your papers. And this is the first paper, the Community Voice newspaper, came out in 1988. If you go out there looking for it, you won't find this one, but this is the first Community Voice newspaper. I got a history right here, the first Community Voice newspaper. And then the Community Voice newspaper evolved. And why don't you tell us about this evolution right here as we hold up this paper?
The evolution, this is when we started touring with the color.
Okay.
And color is very expensive. And I guess what we were trying to do was trying to emulate the big boys out there.
The big boys.
Yeah.
Now. Okay, you got to swim with the big fish. And here's your February edition, the first week of February. And now you see the Community Voice has even changed again.
Right. This is what we are also doing here. We are also trying to find the young professionals who could really identify with this community, who are now, for instance, this lady here, has just received her degree in dentistry.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mr. Weaver, I'd like to say it's been a pleasure to have you here on the show. We could go on and on. We'll definitely get you back because you have definitely made a significant contribution to black history in this area, and it was good to get you here doing our Black History Profile.
Okay.
I'd like to remind everybody out there in television land that you've been listening to Mr. Charles Weaver, the publisher of the Community Voice newspaper. Join us this coming Tuesday at 6 o'clock right here on the same station. We'll get a chance to look at a little bit more of black history as we salute Malcolm X. Malcolm X was assassinated February 21st, so I'll revisit the role of Malcolm X and give one of Malcolm X's greatest speeches, and we have a couple of high school students in here as we discuss Malcolm X's contribution to history. Then we'll come back this next Sunday at 8:30 a.m. again and take a look at another Black History Profile. We look at Pastor Damon of Mount Hermon Church right there in the Dunbar community. So remember, for those who say it can't be done, they're usually interrupted by those who are doing it. We'll see you next week right here on Up Close.